Winter had come to Sodor. It was colder than usual, and fog and mist lingered. The engines didn't mind too much, as they had warm boilers or engines to keep them warm, and nice warm sheds to return to at night when the temperature dropped. Early one evening, as the sun was beginning to set low in the sky behind the buildings of Tidmouth, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds to see Thomas, Percy, and James.
Percy and James, there's going to be a hard freeze tonight. The governor of Sodor has ordered that we supply all the towns our rails can reach with plenty of coal. I need you two to do it.
Of course, sir.
I'd rather not, but if I must, I must.
Good.
Sir Topham Hatt said firmly, and he left back for the station.
I'd be careful, you two, or else Scary Jack Frost will get you.
Pah! Jack Frost is not scary. He's just some made-up nonsense people use to explain why windows get frosty in the morning. What's so scary about that?
Oh, he is. Because I'm not talking about that Jack Frost.
Well, what are you talking about then, Thomas?
Well,
Thomas began, casting a look towards the dark clouds overhead, beginning his story. Long ago, on a railway far away, there lived a little shunting engine called Jack. He worked at a coal mine, and every day he would bring trains to the big yard on the main line to be taken away, or to refill the large coal bunker the big engines used. They laughed at him, and always looked down their nose at him. Being a small shunting engine used at a filthy, grimy coal mine, they felt their position immensely outweighed his.
Get a move on! I need plenty of coal for my express.
A big engine ordered.
Maybe if it didn't take so much, there would be plenty of coal.
Now, if you'd ask anyone, Jack was normally an even-tempered engine. Gruff, but friendly. But when it came to the bigger mainline engines, he had a strong anger towards them. He saw how they treated little engines like their slaves, or simply sub-beings who deserved no respect. They worked in an industry as a private engine. Loud shouting matches were a common sight whenever Jack entered the yard, usually with a long train of coal trucks, and some snobby express engine was always there when he did, ready to belittle them. This would soon begin a chain of events that was leading for trouble. It was the beginning of a brutally cold winter night when Jack huffed into the yard with a train of coal. It was late, so the engine crew decided to leave Jack in the goods shed before heading home. Jack was sleeping soundly, so soundly he didn't hear the shed doors open again. Outside, a big tender engine was waiting. The fireman looked back.
Looks like this spot's already taken.
It's fine. This vermin shouldn't be in the shed anyway. We'll shunt him out of the way.
The crew tried to argue, but the big engine put up such a fuss they had no choice. Jack awoke the moment he felt the biting cold wind hit him.
Hey, what are...
Silence, vermin! If I catch you in a shed in this yard again pretending you're a proper engine, I won't hesitate to throw you into the sea!
He shunted Jack into the rear of a waiting goods train, and then retreated for the sheds, his defiant smirk only being cut off when his crew closed the doors. Out in the open, the wind howled around Jack's frames, sunk down his funnel and into his boiler. The light warmth of his boiler was enough that the swirling snow melted and then froze all over Jack, becoming an icy mask as icicles formed along his face, from his funnel, and from his frames. The cold wind swirled up his firebox grate and down his flute pipes, chilling him inside and out. As the night wore on, Jack got colder and colder. Soon he felt a great discomfort forming alongside his boiler. You see, when water freezes, it turns into ice. And when ice forms, it expands. This can happen if you're able to place a bottle of water into your freezer. The ice expands bigger than the bottle itself. And like a water ball in the freezer, one of the two things happens. The container expands to contain the ice and stays intact, or it bursts. Unfortunately for Jack, this was the case. Morning dawned bitter and cold as the engine crews returned to the yard to find the state of their engine. Jack was frozen in an icy cast that clung to him all over. Long snaking icicles snaked down from his footplate, around his cylinders, and over his axles to freeze him right where he stood on the tracks. Where the big engine's crew returned to steam him up, the engine saw Jack. He howled with laughter.
Look at this. It's little Jack Frost.
Jack tried to retort, but with his mouth frozen over, all he imagined was a series of loud and angry grunts. The big engine did not care in the slightest as he left to pull the morning express. When the yard foreman heard, he was not pleased.
With this engine here, he's blocking the line. I guess we'll have to wait for the weather to turn before that happens.
Jack could hardly speak. He just shivered. The mine had to borrow another engine to do his work, and the big engines there just laughed at his misfortune. Jack said nothing. He just glared coldly through his icy mask. Weeks went by, and the weather stayed frigid. Eventually, the yard foreman grew tired of Jack's presence as he blocked the line.
I don't care what you do, but get him out of here!
Workers set up some furnaces around Jack and lit fires in them. Soon, the ambient temperature began to melt the ice. From the ice came a muffled moaning noise. They took no notice, thinking it was just Jack's metal body warming up. But it wasn't just that. Jack was screaming in pain. After being stone cold for so long, he had become used to the icy cold. If he had been allowed to defrost naturally, he would have been okay. But no, the warm fire heat was hurting them. He screamed, but no one took any notice as the ice around his face remained frozen solid. Soon, the ice around Jack's wheels had melted to where an inspector could see the damages. He surmised that the damages were too great, and that the coal mine decided the only thing they could do was sell Jack for scrap and use that money to purchase a new engine. Jack was taken away to be scrapped. All the while he was screaming and moaning, but no one took any notice. They and the whole town took notice when the moment Jack's ice mask melted off. His horrible screaming could be heard from the small scrapyard he'd been taken to. It continued for hours as the scrapping took some time. The screams continued until eventually there wasn't enough of himself for Jack to exist, and his pain scream died off as his life slipped away. The silence was deafening. Only the sound of the wind could be heard as a new wave of snowflakes drifted from the sky. Winter soon ended and gave way to spring and summer. Fall came and winter returned. The big, boastful tender engine was to take a late-night passenger train one night. His fire burned nicely, and he had plenty of steam for the run. The station master came up, handing the crew a weather report.
Looks like we have a storm tonight.
Pah! So what? A little chill never bothered me.
At that moment, a cold wind blew through the station. The passengers bundled their jackets a little closer, and the firemen shoveled an extra lump of coal into the firebox. But the big engine sniffed, staring out into the cold winter air defiantly. He wasn't going to be battered by a nippy little breeze. The guards soon blew their whistle, and the express set out. As the big express engine puffed away, a particularly dreadful cold chill ran along his boiler out of nowhere. He couldn't tell why, but for a moment he felt like someone was watching him. Down the line, the big express engine pounded along. Snowflakes and the icy wind chilled his face. His boiler was so warm, the snow would melt and gather where the temperature was cooler, like along his handrails and around the thin metal walls of his cab. But he still went on. The coaches swayed gently and following along smoothly. Around him, the wind swirled and whistled along, kicking snow from the drifts on the track and swirling them around. The big engine wasn't sure, but it sounded like the wind was laughing at him.
I won't be beaten back by you. Come along, come along, come along!
The train shuddered and rocked violently before stopping hard on the rails. Passengers and luggage went flying about in the coaches. The guard tended to the passengers before leaving to see what was the matter. They found the crew stepping down from the cab, a lantern swinging in the gloom.
What happened? What is the reason for the rough stop?
We don't know. I think we hit a downdraft or something, because the fire suddenly got blown out of the firebox and...
The driver said before he aimed the lantern at the engine himself, his eyes widening, as did the guards. The engine's boiler was bent and broken. It bent in and out, looking like a massive hand had wrapped around it and squeezed it. Where the boiler wasn't crushed, it had been punctured wide open. From the breaches, icicles stretched upwards against the pull of gravity, frozen in midair. In the mass of water's origins, it was clear the whole boiler had flash froze, the laws of heat making the metal contract inwards violently, enough to cause extreme damage.
I've never seen that happen before. Have you?
No, I've not. My goodness. What's the status of the engine?
Concerned, the crew began walking towards the front of the engine. It took a while as the driving wind blew violently, trying to knock them over. When they reached the front, the driver dropped the lantern to the ground in horror. The engine's face was literally frozen in terror. His mouth opened in an agonizing scream, his eyes bulged wide, and his nose turned black, while the rest of his face was dark, icy blue. His gaze stared out in front, looking ahead of him, staring out into nothing but the snowy, blizzardly gloom. Another engine eventually came to collect the passengers, taking them back to the last station. As for the engine pulling the express, they were pulled to a line-in shed out of the way, hidden from the view of the main line. Even tucked away in the warm shed, the ice didn't melt. It seemed to resist the heat, only melting very slowly over the course of the whole winter. It was mid-spring before the last of it had melted. But as the ice melted, so did the engine's face, peeling away, melting as if it were made of ice itself, bits coming off and melting like dirty, slushy snow. It was obvious when large chunks melted by the heavy, wet splats. Before the engine passed, inspectors asked what had caused this. All the engine could say, through chattering, melting teeth, was,
Chuck. Frost.
The big engine was soon scrapped, and many workers will tell you Scary Jack Frost still roams the rails during hard freezes, looking for engines not safely tucked away in their sheds to turn them into icicles, just like him.
Pah! What nonsense. Jack Frost isn't scary, and such a thing is impossible.
As James headed to the yards, Percy stuck back and looked at Thomas with a smirk.
Nice story, Thomas, but you do know you're a couple months late for Halloween, right?
Thomas grinned.
I know, but do you think it will be a good story for next year?
Ask Edward. He would know if it needs work.
And Percy cheekily puffed away to join James. Night fell and low-hanging mist formed where the rails passed close to the sea. James shivered as he rolled along with his train of coal.
If Jack Frost did exist, he'd certainly be out in this weather.
I know I wouldn't want to be out in this weather all alone. Besides the bitter cold, the winter weather has a way of changing things around you.
James listened carefully, and soon he heard what his driver meant. With the ground covered in snow and the leafless trees and bushes, the sound of his chuffing and the trucks rattling behind him sounded different. Everything sounded crisper and clearer, and the sound seemed to bounce around like being inside a tunnel.
Winter. The only good thing about it is the holidays, and it's nothing but dark and cold.
A rustle from beside the tracks made the red engine jump and go silent as the cold wind gusted gently through the barren trees. Meanwhile, Percy chuffed into Wellsworth with his last coal truck. It was half filled with enough coal to keep the station warm all night. But the station master wasn't so sure.
I don't know, chaps. The weathermen are predicting a snowstorm to pass over during the night, as if the hard freeze wasn't bad enough. I don't know if this coal will be enough.
Percy felt sorry and came up with an idea.
This is my last delivery. You can have my coal.
Could we do that? Where could we put Percy?
The driver asked.
We can park him in the banker's siding, just for the night, and stay in the nearby village inn.
And so it was arranged. Percy's crew emptied his coal bunker and then moved the little green engine onto the siding with only a flickering lantern for company. They tucked Percy in for the night and then went off to the village inn to bed. Not long after, the wind howled and snow began to fall. At last, James was on his way back to the sheds. He had been held up at Vickerstown waiting for the flying kipper to pass, and was doubly eager to get home. As he traveled, the wind howled around him and the snow swirled and danced in the beam of his headlamp. Above, the clouds parted slightly to allow the moon to shine down across the landscape. This made the silent countryside appear even more eerie, as the shadows of twisted bare trees danced in the breeze, and dark shapes seemed to dart in and out of the sight. James gulped as he remembered Thomas's story.
Scary Jack Frost. Letting that stupid story get to me. It's a load of rubbish. Jack Frost is not scary.
As he passed by a large field where children would go sledding during the day, he could see human-like shapes. He knew they were just snowmen that the children had built, but they seemed to be staring directly at him, judging him. The clouds swirled in front of the moon again, and everything was plunged into darkness once more. James shuddered and tried to push it out of his mind. Soon a red light blinked in the darkness. Red signal? James came to a stop near the signal box and waited. His crew huddled closer to the boiler as the firemen shoveled more coal. They waited and waited, but the signal stayed red. Quickly, James got impatient and gave his whistle a blow. Over the wind, his own whistle echoed and warbled oddly, when suddenly he heard something in the patch of darkness just behind the signal box.
Huh? Who said that?
No reply came. James huffed and cast his gaze back to the signal.
Oh, stupid things.
James looked around. This had actually sounded like a voice this time. It had come from the shadows next to the signal box. The sound of the wind howling died down even as cold flakes continued to dance in his face. James strained to listen, wondering if the voice would call out again. Suddenly, the lights from the signal box flicked on. The shadows parted ever so slightly, and in the pale yellow glow of light, James saw a monstrous shape. Its face was glassy smooth, like ice. Snowflakes swirled around it, dancing around icicles that hung from its funnel, where a nose could be, and formed jagged teeth in a wide grinning mouth. An engine. But it was like any other he'd ever seen. It couldn't be. But what else could it be?
Hello, James.
It spoke in a voice as frigid as the snow, and creaking like the sound of ice cracking.
Scary Jack Frost!
The signal dropped, and James shot off the moment his regulator opened, wheels spinning before they gained traction. Sparks coughed from his funnel into the cold air before being snuffed out by the swirling snowflakes which seemed to pounce upon the warmth like wolves upon unsuspecting sheep. Behind him, he thought he could hear the sound of deep laughter that drifted into the wind.
Oh my dear, it seems Jack Frost really got you.
Percy stirred and opened his eyes, which felt heavy as lead. The sun was shining on the beautiful white snowy day as Elizabeth, the Fat Controller's old steam lorry, stood nearby as his crew pulled sacks of coal from her bed. He tried to speak, but his lips refused to move. That was when he noticed what had happened. His whole face was covered in ice and snow. His crew laughed.
You look like a polar bear, Percy.
Or a yeti.
Percy just shivered. His crew quickly built up a fire, and quickly his icy mask melted away. With a cheerful whistle to Elizabeth, Percy steamed back to the sheds. When Percy arrived back, James was talking loudly to Thomas.
But I did see Scary Jack Frost. He was all white, with a big spiky face with sharp teeth.
Oh, James, I made that story up.
Thomas laughed before chuffing away.
But I really did see something. He even knows my name.
Maybe you saw Percy. The weather got so cold he looked like an abominable snowman.
James looked over and scowled at Percy.
You little green caterpillar! You have nerve to pull a prank on me like that!
Percy looked puzzled.
I was asleep all night, James. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, very cute. He's denying it after being caught out. Typical shunter.
James, I slept the whole night away and woke up with the ice mask, unable to say a thing.
But you did call out to me while I was at the signal, didn't you?
Signal? If you had, James, I think you would have known if it was me. Wellsworth keeps their station lights on till late at night.
Well, Wellsworth? But the signal stopped me at Marin, which was where you were, weren't you?
Percy had no answer to give the Red Engine. He couldn't have been in two places, and James knew this. He went visibly pale and scuttled off to the coal chute in a rush. For the rest of the winter, some engines never let James forget about scary Jack Frost, though the Red Engine always insisted that he had seen something in the pale yellow light of the signal box, even if he found himself doubting himself. Had it been real, or had the big Red Engine simply imagined it? Whatever the case, the following winter, James always made sure to top off his tender with plenty of coal. He said it was for hard work, but I don't think that's the cold, hard truth. Don't you?